All right, in your notes, week 12 in computer concepts. So bring it over here first. So I've already told you, you have the lab test coming up and all that. So I missed yesterday. Guess where I was at? Jury duty. So everybody has that reaction, right? Jury duty. Oh, students, you get out of it. You know this, right? How many of you have been called and you get out? You do. If you get called, you're one of the first groups that they say, come in, tell us you're a full-time student, and you're out. I got actually put in the box. I was the first, and you know what I mean by the box? There's 12 seats, and they sit you 1 through 12. I was number 1 in the box for a 2-week trial. They interviewed us all for 2 hours about our opinions about different stuff, and I was the prosecutor's first one out. They let me go. I hated it. Was like this weird, like I'm happy to be rejected, right? It was like I walked out going, we shouldn't because it is our civic duty, but it is an interesting process to be, in that court thing. It's totally cool. So anyway, I'm a little bit behind, but not too bad. So here's our topic today. We're going to talk about the web, right? So in your notes, we're going to talk about the web. And really, the whole lecture is intended to have you understand this. What happens when you type, when you type facebook.com in a browser? What happens when you type that into a browser? Do any of you have any idea? Any part of that? Yeah, so, when you type it in and you hit enter, you know the results, right? I'm guessing. How many of you on Facebook? Yeah. Yeah, it takes you to Facebook, right? So, but do you know what happens between the time you hit that and you get Facebook? You have any idea?
Your computer requests information from the servers, and then the servers send that information.
Yeah, so in general, that's true, right? So come back here. So in general, you request something, and the server brings it to you. That's a very simplified version of what I'm about to explain. But that in general is what happens. Many people think that, and this term browsing? The browsing indicates you're looking and it's all out there. Really, we should rename browsers to gatherers. So in your notes, it really should be a web gatherer. Because what you're doing is requesting resources that get brought back to your computer. So that's one of the first things I want, and I hope that after this you kind of have a new appreciation when you hit something like Facebook to know what it does, okay? So first let's talk about just the term facebook.com. What do we call that? Anybody know? Okay, besides a time waste. Okay, good. So in this case, we talk about it in terms of a URL. Very nice. So let's break it into its terms. Whoa. I got caught up there. So let's break it into each of its terms, right? So we talk about it, URL, Universe Resource Locator. So the first part is a protocol. And we talked about protocols the other day, if you remember. Okay? So this protocol is Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP. And by the way, do you have to type in HTTP anymore? Did you ever? Yeah, in the early days, you used to have to type HTTP : and then you used to have to type the www too. Do you have to do that anymore? Why do you think we no longer have to do that? We're lazy bums? Yeah, the browser does it for you. The browser takes care of that, right? So the domain name. So this is the piece that the company who's hosting selects, right? Facebook.com, Google.com, which is always an interesting story generally on these big companies, right? About how they come up with this. But what do you think the general rule on domain names is these days? Okay, so company name. If you start a new company, do you think somebody's already probably got your company name for a domain? Most likely. Have you ever checked your own names? Okay, have you? How many of you have checked your own names? So, and by the way, here's how you do it if you've never done it. I'm going to use a website called hover.com. You can use a variety of websites. I'm going to type Rio Waller. What's your guess? What do you think? It is Now it's seeing, and it searches against what's called the registrar to see what's out there. It is, who do you think has it? Of course I do. Of course I do. I don't do anything with it anymore, but, right? So the Rio Waller part is gone. But look at this as I look through the list. Look at all these, and what do we call this last part right here? The first part is the domain. The last 3 characters, if you saw it on the list, so put this in your notes, the domain and then the top level domain, okay? So the domain part is the part you select, and then the top level domain is the part you fall into. So it's a categorization. But by far, what is the most common? Huh? Commercial.com. But notice my list. Look here. Look at the list of what Hover's trying to sell me. Look at this. .me, .co, .info, .online. Pretty long, right? See some of these? Guru, I like that one. I think I'll pick that one. So if I wanted to host a website, I'd have to pay, just for reserving the name, $24 a year. In this case, you know, that's just to reserve the name, okay? So that's not doing the whole website. That's just saying the name. So the first step when you're creating websites is you have to figure out what's your domain name going to be, okay? And do you want to move into some of these non-recognized, although becoming more common? What's the term we're using for this last part? Did you put it in your notes? Yeah, top-level domains, okay? So, anymore, I'll tell you, the last time I researched this, which I think was about 6 months ago, anything less than 8 characters, any combination of letters are gone. You can't get with the .com, let me qualify that. You can't get them anymore because they're taken. Why do you think that'd be true? Because .com is the most popular and shorter is better. Okay? Because if you had Google Enterprises, whatever, the longer, the less likely people are going to remember it. How many of you now, when they show commercials, at the end of the commercial is the website URL or the domain name, right? Okay? So the first step when we're talking about the web is somebody has to come up with the name, the domain name. They have to figure out what TLD they fall under, right? But these 2 things in the front are set. And we'll talk about the protocol in a minute. But this subdomain, really, and these days, anybody been to a website where if they didn't type www, it didn't work? Yeah? Do you remember the name? Fresno Cities used to be like this, not more than a year ago. And it was kind of an embarrassment for those of us in the industry because it's like, really, all you have to do is do an entry on the website, on the hosting site to make that work or not require that. So I'm happy to see that they did figure it out. But most websites these days don't require it, right? So one thing I would say to you, check your name if you're at all interested. And I want you to go, I'm going to go down even further. Let's see if they're in here. Oh, look at this, .pizza, right? Now, who would want a .pizza TLD? Pizza. Why wouldn't you want that, right? .cooking, .pub, .fish, .date, LGBT, .love. Oh, that's an interesting one. Oh, look at this. Now, by the way, the top level domains, edu, can anybody get those? No, you can't. You actually have to apply for those. And how about .gov? No, you got to apply for those. That's why these new ones coming up are kind of interesting. Do notice, though, what's happening in the price in some of these. So it's actually, some of them are different, and you have to start asking why, okay? So, and part of it is where they come from, right? Because what's happening now, and by the way, here's an interesting article I found about the most expensive domain names ever sold. Any guess what's number 1? No, Google was actually originally registered by Google. This is the idea that somebody else registers the domain and then sells it. Number 1, vacationrentals.com. So somebody bought vacation rentals as a domain, but didn't use it. Because can you imagine this coming up and reserving these names and then selling to people that might want them? That's really a good business. We actually call it, and put this in your notes, cyber squatting. I know, right? All these crazy terms. Cyber squatting is when you buy domain names just with the purpose of reselling them. So vacation rentals, privatejet.com, insure.com. This is the funny one. Right? Yeah, 14 million. Now, interesting enough, part of one of my past careers, actually it was the career I had. It was the career I had before I came here. I was actually I owned part of a hosting company. So hosting company, so when you get the domain, that reserves it. Hosting company is where you'd put the web pages in order to host them, okay? We had in our data bank, coffee.com. How treasured do you think coffee.com would be? I got emails almost weekly for offers for coffee.com. We didn't own it. Pete's Coffee, you know who Pete's Coffee is? Pete's Coffee actually was one of our clients, and so they had registered coffee.com, but I got emails, I'll give you $2 million for coffee.com. I'm like, I'm only representing the client. And then I couldn't really tell them who the client was, although you can figure out. A lot of times here, I don't know if they tell you at the beginning here, you can make an offer, right? So right here on the website, you can make an offer. Okay, so step 1, when you're going to a website, is you have to type in the domain, right? Got that? So here's the deal, though. The internet runs off of, anybody remember me saying what the protocol of the internet is? Last time we talked about this? TCPIP. Remember me showing you that little graphic? I was actually going to bring it up. I was going to have it up before I started, but I didn't. So the TCPIP is the idea that it breaks things into packets. I'm looking for a good image, but it breaks it into packets, and then those packets are sent out through the internet with the IP address on them, okay? So what is the protocol of the internet? TCP/IP, packets with addresses. So here's the deal. Because that's the underlining protocol, the web doesn't understand domain names. We need something that translates. So let me actually show you what I mean, and then we'll talk about it. I'm going to bring up terminal, okay? I'm going to type ping facebook.com. And if you can see it, let me go ahead and stop it. What is this first? It says ping, and then what's that? The IP address. So, hold on, I think it's X, C, maybe it's C. So really, when you type in facebook.com, the first thing it has to do is find the IP address, okay? So let me actually prove it to you. So, let me do this. Let me bring it down here. If I went to a new tab, and I was to type, if anybody can remember it, but I'll do it here. 31, right? 31.13.74.1. You got it? Why, then, in this case, why do we have to have facebook.com? Or do we have to have facebook.com? Huh? Because humans don't remember. Humans don't remember numbers. We remember names. So in your notes, this is called DNS, Domain Name System. Right? And here's the image for it. So you have to have a lookup. So the first thing that happens when you type in right here, right? I need directions to, and this is just an example of, how stuff works, but it could have been Facebook in our example, right? So the first thing it asks is the domain name is not in my database. So it actually, in this case, queries. So your browser, when you type in a website, it's going to ask the local DNS. So in this campus, we have a DNS server, and it's going to first ask it, do you know this website, and do you know the IP? And if it doesn't know it, it'll go to the DNS server. And if it doesn't know it, it goes to the root server. So this is actually the process that happens. Have you ever noticed sometimes the first time you type in a website, it takes longer? That's why. Because if the local, and by the way, once somebody in here types a website, and we know Facebook is probably all over the place, but once they type in a website that is not as commonly known, the next person that asks for that within the network, it knows it. So it keeps that copy local. Okay? That's why it's called, and have you heard the term cache? And I don't mean C-A-S-H, C-A-C-H-E, cache. So that is the DNS caching that IP. Okay? So again, once the first thing that happens, so step one in the process, and I'll come to you in a second. Step one is it has to do what? Convert from what to what? Convert from domain name to IP address. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So actually in this case, cache, and I'm going to talk about cache related to the browser in a minute. Cache in the case of DNS doesn't happen locally, but it happens on your network. So on our network here on campus, we have a DNS server, kind of, but it houses those. Cache is actually something different. What you're talking about is your browser cache. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so step one is what? Yeah, so convert it, figure out where it's at. The further out it is, the less somebody has been on either, and by the way, in our case, it would search the campus, and then it would search the campus's IP, and then it would search higher and higher until ultimately it'd have to get to what's called the root servers, which are over here, okay? And that's called DNS, Domain Name Services. Now, the next step is actually, remember me talking about this, the protocol right here? So once we get the IP, then another kind of conversation starts happening between the browser and the server. Anybody remember last time when I was talking about networks, I was talking about client-server architecture, right? You have clients and you have servers. Most of your home networks, though, are peer-to-peer. There's nothing controlling them. Well, in this protocol, we have a client-server architecture. So the client, in this case, is my browser. The server is going to be, right, the place where I'm going to get Facebook.com. In this example, it says you study, but it doesn't matter. So the first step is the step I talked about here. DNS, find me the IP. Now that I have the IP, go over to the server and deliver back to me the resources that I need. Okay? That's why I said it should be called not a web browser, but a web gatherer. Now, rather than to talk about it, let me show it to you. I'm going to do something in my browser that says inspect element. And inspect element turns on something that if you do more coding past this class, you will learn. It's called the developer tools. And I'm going to go to something called the network. And now I'm just going to hit Facebook real quick. So to just get the Facebook front page, it took 37 requests. Let me go back here and show you what I mean. Was it 38? Okay, so it came in one more after I started. So when my computer asks for Facebook, this HTTP is actually a conversation between the client, which is my browser, and the server, which is where Facebook's hosted. And the first thing it says is probably give me, and this is actually, you can see it in the list here. So the first thing it gave me was the HTML file, and then it started giving me, anybody recognize this? What's that? The CSS, the style sheet. And then it started giving me PNGs, which are pictures. Again, how many? 38 requests, 128. And by the way, if you want to see this in Chrome, you would do about cache. Okay? So those are all the files on my computer right now that I have been to these locations, and I have gathered all these resources to mine locally. By the way, I used to show this, but I don't anymore. One of the reasons your browser is so important is if you're using Internet Explorer, these files are actually exposed on your computer. And on Internet Explorer, you can actually see them. On Chrome, on Firefox, on most modern browsers, you cannot see them because it is a security risk, just the fact that you can look at them. Okay? Because once you put something on your computer, right, it has a bit of control that you probably don't want it to have. And so by putting it in a secured place, it keeps you safer. So what's important? The browser you select. Okay? Just a good browser will make you more secure. So how many requests did we have to get just Facebook's front page? 38. It took 8.53 seconds. And actually, right here, the DOM, and this is actually just part of what happens, is it gets everything ready. If you take more programming classes, you'll learn about this. And it's really 409 milliseconds. Now, is it going to change if I log in? How much is it going to change? Really? Okay, don't show my screen. Let me log in real quick, okay? So I'm going to do, and let's watch. I logged in. You see how many? Let me go down and show you. Still going, exactly. It's still going. So the step one was it got, when I typed in Facebook, it went and found the DNS. The DNS found the IP. The IP then, through HTTP, sent all these requests to pull in all the things I needed to look at my feed. 274 requests. Things came in. Now, why is it moving? Why is it moving right now? Okay, so let's actually do a little thing here. I'm setting it I'm just going to start scrolling. Do you see it? Do you see it? What's happening? You ever wonder when you're scrolling through Facebook, it's like, God, is it never ending? Do they give it to you all at once? No, they feed it to you as you scroll. Why do they do that? Save what? No, good try. Huh? Yes, to make it appear as if it's instantaneous. In some senses, we all know depending on what, it's not instantaneous. Depending on your speed. I saw a thing today. Facebook decided they're going to have part of a day of a week where they all use a 2G speed connection. Why do you think that is? No, so they can sympathize with people that are on slower internet, because you think the people that work at Facebook have fast internet? So who are they, when they look at it, they're like, man, that's fast. That's like totally fast, right? But if you're on a 2G network and you're doing this, how fast is it? How many on your phone? It feels like sometimes it's, right, really slow. And think about the difference between your computer, how much RAM and how much speed you have versus how much your cell phones have. Although they're getting better, right? They're still slow comparatively. Okay, so I wanted to show you that because that is a really important part. So what's the steps? Find the IP, have an HTTP conversation, and really it is a protocol, but it's a conversation between the client and the server that asks for resources, okay? And in this case, asking for a lot of resources, right? Now, how different would this be if I look at Fresno City College? Why? Why would it be a lot lower if I look at City? Very nice. It's and this goes in your notes, it's a static site. Okay? So I was going to do Fresno City. So let's walk through it. FresnoCity.com. First day, before I hit enter, what happens here? It goes to find the IP, right? Through DNS. DNS goes to find the IP. Once IP happens, then HTTP has a conversation with the server to bring back what? everything I need to see that. And now what I needed in this case, yeah, show the screen, right? If I'm going to go back down, I'm going to go to network. I'm going to actually have to reload it to show you. So if I want cities page, I had 55 requests to get that page. And what that means is all the things on here. That means every picture. That means all the text. That means anything, these are all images, are 53 requests. Okay, now 61. A few more came in, okay? Okay, so far, you got that so far? Make sense? So from now on, when you type something, I want you to at least be cognizant of what's happening here. So now let's talk about this server for a minute, okay? Have you heard the term file server or server in general? How many of you have heard that term? Yeah? So it's not that different than like a food server, right? You ask for something, it delivers it back to you. But for a moment, what do you think might be the difference between Fresno City's server and Facebook's server? Okay, so the domain is different. Yeah, good, right? So the edu, so the domain is different, but let's think about the server, because once DNS does its job, we get the IP, we get to the server, and then it's all server stuff. How do you think Facebook's server differs from Fresno City's server? Yeah, do you think it's one server for Facebook? No, it's called a server farm. In your notes, for Facebook, it's called a farm. For Google, it's called a farm. They're huge data centers. I mean, huge. Now, here's the other thing. When you go to Facebook, does Facebook just look at all your friends and show you each of the most current status updates from your friends? No. It used to. Anybody remember when it used to do that? Anybody remember when Facebook, that's what it did? It was awesome. But why did they stop? So let's just be clear. In the beginning, when the world started at Facebook, which by the way, was started by what guy? Mark Zuckerberg, who's now outrageously rich, right? So when Mark started Facebook, when he was at Harvard, right? Was it Harvard? He did it really for people to get to know each other. And really all he was doing is showing everybody statuses. But over time, how do they figure out how to serve up for me and for you what shows up here? Huh? Say it again. How so? Oh, yeah. How did they figure out what shows up on your feed, on your wall? How do they figure it out? What goes into their thinking? That's right. That's right. So in this case, it's not a server, it's a server farm, and that farm has got databases of everything you've ever liked. It's true. Not only what you liked, but whose friends you like. Which friends of yours you like the most? Friends that you don't comment on will stop showing up in your feed. Have you ever noticed? Yeah. Is it awesome? What? That's right. By the way, just because I think it's interesting, can you actually not defriend somebody but stop looking at what they post? Yeah. Some people are like, I just defriended you. I don't, they haven't said that to me, but in general they say that, and I'm like, well, why didn't you just stop their feed? Right? Well, it's okay. You can do it whichever way they want it. So what goes into this is a database of all your likes, right? So and by the way, let's see, Dig is definitely something I like. Dig is a website that I follow all the time. So Facebook shows me. So why does Facebook not want me to just go to that website? That's right. Because the more I stay on Facebook, the more what? The more money they get for advertising. So going back here, this server, and again, farm for Facebook, for Fresno City, it's one server. That's all it is, right? So what goes into making Facebook on that farm is on that server, there's an application server, there's a database server, there's all kinds of servers that I can't even begin to imagine. In an instant of a second, figure out what they think I want to see. Yeah, go ahead.
So, like, say Facebook and Google, do they have in a sense, Facebook pretty much all over the world on different servers? That way it's not.
Yeah, so good question. If you didn't hear, if the online students didn't hear that, and I'm sure they did, it's a great question. It's like, so in this case, I was talking about a server farm, and there actually are multiple farms in the US, but they're also done what we call load balancing. And so what they do is based on the continent, they actually have some of these servers setting in the continents themselves. So when you're in Europe, when you type Facebook, you'll hit that server that's closest geographically to you first. And then depending on what else happens, that server may communicate with some other server to get some other item that they're going to present to you. But ultimately, the primary data is going to come off of that server.
So is that why they make first started
Yeah. Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg has, I mean, and so does Google. This is not any different than Google. We could go through the same example with Google, right? But in this server space, there's a lot that happens. You guys in this class have learned how to build web pages with 3 pieces. What are those 3 pieces you've learned? HTML and JavaScript. JavaScript is a client-side scripter, right? So in this case, all that code that you're writing happens here. You're not learning the code over here. So in your notes, if you were learning server code, it would look like the following names. It would either be PHP, ASP, JSP, something. Just put at least a couple of these. And now, this is why JavaScript is so cool to learn. So JSP, ASP, PHP, Ruby, I could go on and on and on. Go is actually another one, so I'm studying right now as well. So let me make the case for you why JavaScript is good to learn. So not only is JavaScript running on the client, right, your computer, it now also runs on the server. So when you learn JavaScript, you can learn both client and server. Kind of make sense? Yeah, it is very awesome. And this is why I think it's a fundamental computer skill that everyone at least needs to have exposure to. And I know some of this programming stuff is not that fun. Although, unless you're BSing me, your comments make it sound like you kind of enjoy it. Let's show them. Are you kind of enjoying it? Okay. Okay, so FYI for everyone, did I tell you? Okay, no, next Tuesday my IT lab rep's going to be here. Okay, she will be here. I will record it. It will not be a required. You don't have to take notes. The online students, I at least want them to have it. I want you to hear what they say, and I want them to hear what you have to say, okay? Because I chose Code Academy. I was one voice of many of my IT lab. Okay, so I'm just, and don't shoot the messenger, but okay, right? All right, so first of all, so why am I saying, so yeah, I'm glad to see most of you seem to be enjoying it. Why is JavaScript such a good thing to learn then? Paraphrase what I just said. Client and server. Yeah. Is that a question or just no? So again, Facebook, right? Farm, a lot of stuff going on we have no idea about. But I can tell you, just by looking at my feed, I have some idea what they're doing these days. And I got to tell you, it's not happy sometimes. You know? Because it's kind of like I feel like they censor some of the things that I want to see. But at the same time, they seem to be starting to figure out what I like, which also kind of weirds me out. I know exactly, we know you, Rio, right? Exactly. I mean, but they have so much data on me. Holy Mac, and on you, right? Because how much time how many people are on the planet are on Facebook? 1 in 7 on the planet. which I think is actually 1 in 6 or 5 now. For every, that's how many people are on Facebook. Tripped out, right? The bigger it gets, the more people that's on it. And by the way, Facebook actually has a problem right now. On this server side, they're running PHP. They've actually had to modify the way PHP naturally runs because they can't always handle the load. About 6 months ago, Facebook started having some problems. Did you notice it? Yeah, and that's why. They weren't load balancing very well. Okay? So it was too much. All right, so do you have an idea now about when you type in something what happens? So Facebook is what we call dynamic. Fresno City is what we call static. Which, by the way, I have to say this. We have now, last year, hired a new webmaster for Fresno City, and she is doing a much better job of at least trying to keep the content current. Okay? And she is working hard on getting a new server so that we can actually have a better website. God, please, let's get one. Okay? We need one. Huh? Yeah. So this is actually kind of what I was saying in a visual form, right? So you, the server, you go through the internet, which, by the way, the protocol HTTP, what protocol is this? HTTP. And how's that different? It's secured, right? So if you're not under a HTTPS, whatever you're talking about can be sniffed. Remember sniffed? Means somebody could read it. So whenever you give personal information, make sure it says HTTP. So in this case, here's the example of what we were talking about. Let's kind of say this, and this is not Facebook's diagram, because by the way, does Facebook provide their server diagram? Heck no. Does Google provide theirs? Why would they? The security, it's their brain trust, right? It's their intellectual property, how they figured out how to do this. So, but in general, we have load balancers like we were talking about. You have servers, you have database servers, replication servers, you have primary databases, which is, by the way, database, you hear this again and again. This is one of the next subjects we're going to start talking about in this class because it's such an important to at least have a concept about what these things are. Okay? So these are real world things. This is really how the world works these days. And it's not going to change. It's going to do nothing but increase. So, but these days, do businesses have to have a website to succeed? Do they? Do you think some businesses could just have a good Facebook presence and it would be as good as a website for them?
Yeah.
Some businesses are starting to ask why they need a website when they can do Facebook. Right? Yeah, because a part of Facebook is publicly facing, right? You guys know this, right? When you do posts, they're publicly facing, meaning they're public. You ever notice that little when you share, is this public? Next time you do, check it out. Right? Yeah. It'll also by default say your location unless you tell it you don't want it to. And you ever had this happen? This is weird to me. It happened yesterday. I was walking. I went up to court yesterday, right? I was walking and my watch from Facebook told me one of my friends was nearby. That's a little creepy.
That's what my phone does too.
Right? I mean, Facebook knows a lot. And in some senses we like it. In some senses it drives us crazy. Okay, we're almost done. Yeah, Brandy.
Sometimes it's weird because I turn off the location and like it stays on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Brandy's saying, and the online students didn't hear it, sometimes I will turn off my location tracking in Facebook, but it still tracks you, right? So what does that tell you? Are they paying attention to your preferences? Probably not. They're overriding them in some way. They want to make you think you have, and here's the other thing. You ever seen the rant that goes on when Facebook changes their settings? Oh my God, people get so weirded out. And I can understand that because they don't spend a lot of time thinking about the changes to the privacies. And they don't go through and look at it because it takes time to figure out. Okay, so let me end with this. So on this server concept, and really I just want to contextualize. When we talk about desktops, what most of us are using, right? Windows is obviously very popular, but when we talk about the servers, right? Windows is still in there in this example, and this is a little old, 47%, but the 14 and the 29 are Linux and Unix. So really they're basically the same kind of thing. So they make up a big percentage of the server side stuff, okay? So Windows doesn't dominate on the server side is what I want you to know, okay? Like they do on the desktop side. So that's just kind of the reality of where we're at. So we talk about web OSs. Windows is there, but not quite as much. Okay, so what you're going to do is the last part of this is you're going to watch an 8-minute video, and we can either do it now or you can do it on your own, about the Facebook servers to get a little more information and a little more. It was from Science, the Science Channel, and I found it this morning. So anyway, let's say goodbye to them. Bye, everyone, and we'll drop it right there.